Hello, my name is Christopher Guyton, and I have been tasked with designing and implementing a new mechanic into this data-driven, tile-based game project. The mechanic that I've introduced into this project is a lever interactable that allows the player to control other tiles and open areas or routes that have not previously been traversable. Now, the lever-based interactable does not have to be limited to this application, but for the purposes of introduction, this is what it is being used for. So for example, if I walk up into this area, the player character cannot enter this tile. They cannot climb up, they're blocked. Similarly, if I walk up here into these tiles, the player character cannot traverse and make their way to the goal. But there are a few lever tiles, lever interactables, that are available in the stage that will change this. So the player character walks up to this lever, hits the interact button, and it plays a little sound effect and raises these tiles and creates a path for the player to walk up. Similarly, if they hit the event interact button here, the same sound effect will play and a bridge is formed for the player to be able to traverse and end the level. So I'm going to walk you through how I created the system. The first thing that I did was I went to the core folder and interactables, and I created a child of the interactable box blueprint, and I called mine interactable lever make bridge, but you can call yours whatever you'd like. I manipulated the static mesh on the z-axis, so just kind of scale it up a little bit on the z-axis just to make it look more like a lever. And then for this I needed a few variables, so I have my player variable, which is set to type player pawn. I have a tiles to effect variable, which is an array of tiles, and that I set that to instance editable. And then I have a Boolean variable called activatable, which is going to basically dictate whether or not the player can interact with the lever, and I have that default value set to true. I also have a few rotator variables. One is the initial rotation of the blueprint here, and the other one is the rotation direction, which is the direction that you want the lever to animate in. And then when I go over to the event graph, the first thing that I did was on begin play. Remember, this is a child, so you want to inherit all of the properties of the parent. So drag off parent begin play and get the actor rotation and set it to your initial rotation variable. So that's the first thing that should happen. And then to create the little animation, the first thing that happens after the event interact event is there's a check just to make sure that the lever is activatable. Again, that's default set to true, but you might want it set to false just in case you want something else to control whether or not the lever is able to be interacted with. Then if that check is true, then we set the player variable to our player variable, and then we play a sound at the location. I have a custom sound here that I created called lever trigger, but you can have whatever sound effect you'd like or none at all. And then I have a simple timeline here with a float track with two keyframes, one on 0 with a value of 0 and one on 1.5 with a value of 1, and the length is 1.5. Then I got the initial rotation and the rotation direction variables, and I plugged them into a lerp rotator node with the initial rotation in A and the rotation direction in B, and I dragged off the float track and plugged it into the alpha. That is going to give you the initial animation, but in order to get it to animate back into place, you can take that return value and then plug it into another lerp rotator, at A, and then take the initial rotation variable and plug it into B with the same float track plugged into the alpha. You then take that return value and plug it into a set actor rotation node and hook it up to the update output of the timeline. So that's the animation portion of the system. Now let's get into the real meat and potatoes, which is how you create the steps for the player. So that tiles to effect array, you want to plug that into a for each loop, and then off of that we want to take the array elements and cast to the type, which in this case is tile floor, and we'll get more into that in a minute when you see kind of deeper how this was created. But you want to cast to tile floor, and you want to. I have a check here to make sure that it's a step tile. That is because in the tile, the main tile blueprint, I created a variable here called step tile, and that is just to check to see if the tile that's being affected is actually supposed to turn into a step. Because again, at the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that this lever mechanic can have several applications, and the step tile is just one of them. But that derives from the base class for tile, and it's just a Boolean called step tile, which is defaulted to false. And so it'll check that. It'll check to see if that the tile from the array that is being affected is a step tile, and if so, it'll cast to the floor type, and it'll take the offset level variable from that floor type, and add it to the world's offset. Now, what is that offset variable, you might ask? Now, this is another thing that I manipulated in another default blueprint that came with this project. I added a offset level vector variable, which is also instance editable, and that was added directly to the floor tile blueprint, because right now we're only manipulating floors, and so that's just what I decided to do. I did not add that into the base tile blueprint. So we can close these for now, we don't need them. But that's what that offset level variable is. So as tile floor, you take the offset level and you plug it into this add world offset, and then you also take the target and plug it into that target component. Now you want to make sure this is the scene component that's being outputted and not the root or the base floor component or any other component. Just make sure that's the scene root component that's being plugged into this target on the add world offset. And then after that, you want to take the tile floor again, and you want to set the can enter variable to true, because you want the player to be able to enter those tiles. Now, this is just an extra check just to make sure, but by default, some of them might be set to true. But just in case they aren't, I have that in there just to make sure that they're set to true. And then for this one, I have it set activatable to false. So you can only activate this lever one time. Now, you might have noticed that there is another check here on completed to set an array elements to can enter. Now, this exists because there are going to be instances where we want a tile that is to be affected to be able to be entered after the lever is affected, but they might not necessarily be a step tile. So this is just an additional check. I can show you the way that works just by looking at the project once more. Let's let this open up. So this tile, for example, here, if that tile was able to be entered, the player character would just be able to jump up on this tile and activate that lever on the top level there without having to activate this lever first. But because of that, the way that this check works, once I hit this lever, that tile is now able to be entered and walked up. So that's what this additional check is for here. And I have that coming out of the completed because I want all of this code to run before this code runs and checks just the other array element. So now putting this all together, so you can close that. Putting this all together, the first thing that you want to do here is you want to first just pick a tile and add the new interactable type to interactable lever make bridge, or whatever it is that you named it, and then update that tile. What will happen is you'll see this interactable lever show up, and what you want to do is you want to select the tiles that are going to be affected by the player interacting with the lever. So if you go to default here on the details panel, you can see I have a few panels set tiles set up to be affected, and those correspond to 0 is this tile right here, 1 is this tile right here, and 2 is this tile right here, and 3 is this tile that we just looked at that is not able to be entered. So they're all floor tiles, and all you do is you grab that little eyedropper tool here, and then you just pick the tile that you want to be affected. But you're not quite done here. So then you want to go over to the floor tile, and remember that that offset lever variable that we want to mess with. Yeah, so you want the offset to be slightly up on the Z. So in this case, I have it set to sort of like stairs. So this first one's offset lever is 1. The second one, I believe, is 2. Yep, and the third is 3. So they kind of progress sort of like stairs in that sense. For these, for example, these are all a bridge, so they all offset to 3, and that's fine. And then you also want to make sure, in this case, that you have the step tile go down to wherever you place the lever controlled, or the step tile Boolean, or whatever you called it. Make sure that that's checked, because again, if we go into that blueprint, this blueprint, it's going to check to see if that step tile Boolean is activated. So you want to make sure that each of the steps that you want to affect are checked as step tiles, so that the lever can actually interact with them. And that's pretty much it. That's how it works. If you've done it correctly, then when you go in to check your game, your tiles should raise and allow the player to enter into new areas. So again, I am Christopher Guyton, and this has been my mechanic presentation.